If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
And friends, I am officially a bad brother and father because I scheduled the live stream and then checked my messages and realized that my sister had scheduled a video call. So anyway, well, it's not like they're going to come here and watch my live stream, right? Am I right? Who knows? maybe my son will actually show up. I don't think so, though. So anyway, no big deal. I jumped into the video call and said a quick hello. So we're also going to say goodbye to Krita, which is now apparently stuck in full screen mode, and we're going to close the window. So I see your message, Maria. No, I saw it on Discord, but I've been running around like a monkey. You know, like the monkey in my show. Well, I've been running around like monkey because I was working on website development stuff for a client for like 2 hours, and I've been wanting to get to the animation stuff today. And so let's just jump in and get right to it. So where are we at? Let's jump back to the show and I'll show you what's going on. I had posted a somewhat tongue-in-cheek poll today, well, it was yesterday actually, saying, hey, look, I feel like webisode 2 of Salt and Light is not ready. And what actually tipped me off that it wasn't ready more than anything was working on the score. Because when you're doing music and you really feel like you're fighting it, usually it's not a music problem. It's usually got something to do with the edit of the show. Okay, and in the case of the show, it's not so much the editing; it's just certain shots were throwing me off kilter because I just didn't think that the storytelling was where I really wanted it to be. Okay, so anyway, we've got this sequence where Mel comes out and we see Luka for the first time, and so Mel stops, and the way the script reads, he says, oh, he notices the kid as if he doesn't know him, right? And he says, oh, hey, cool monkey, you know. So anyway, I don't think that the dialogue is particularly amazing to begin with. But more importantly, I thought, you know, actually Mel should know Luka. He should address him by name. And I really felt that the acting could be improved. So I animated this shot in Blender, which is a really good test case for what we're going to do tonight. Because all of this animation here, right here, other than the blinking of his eyes and the change in his mouth, it's one drawing. The whole thing is done with one single drawing. So now when I live streamed last week, I'll say that Alan, Dan, and Ed Tadeo, when I sort of ran into a bit of a difficult part of the shot last week, they both quite rightly told me, Dave, just quit messing with Tahoma's selection tool and trying to like squish and move things around. Just redraw it. And they were correct. However, at the same time, I am an animation pragmatist, and I would also argue, based on what I see in this shot, that really the problem wasn't the way I was trying to do it as much as truly, and this is usually not the case. Usually if you're running into a trouble, it's probably because you need to improve your skills, or you need to learn your tools better, or whatever. But in the case I ran into last week, truly the problem was deficiency in the tools themselves. They just weren't up to scratch and able to do what I needed to have done. Now what I'm seeing here in Blender, this is what I like to see. I love this because you could say the tool is not impeding me. I'm able to draw a single drawing, and again, pragmatically speaking, there's no reason I need to draw 25 drawings here. There's no reason I should have to ink and paint 25 drawings if I can draw a single drawing that best captures the overall attitude of the shot, and then I can use my digital tools to dial it in and make things move and all the rest. And I would argue this is a pretty good looking shot, despite the fact that it's actually one lousy drawing. So now the question becomes, as I said in the description, hey, Nagut, and by the way, hello, Awkward Penguin. So as I said in the description, tonight's going to be about workflow. It's going to be about what do you do, obviously working in Blender, when you want to leverage your efforts and you don't want to paint yourself in a corner, okay, so to speak. When I was working on this shot a couple days ago, we'll go ahead and save that, I kind of painted myself into a corner because I didn't really do things in the correct order. And what I found was, it wasn't a big deal, but what I did find was trying to backpedal and correct the mistake that I made took quite a while. I mean, the whole shot, when I look at this shot, this is not a shot that should really take 3 hours. It really isn't. Because of the order in which I did things, it probably took longer than it needed to. And of course, there's still plenty to do on this shot, like inking Golic, putting in a background, blah, 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 blah. But what we're going to work on today is this shot. This is because this is a shot actually in Webisode 2. And so what we're going to do is first we're going to look, I'm just going to talk through what you're really wanting to do here. Okay. And if you guys have questions, you can certainly, you're talking about last week, Awkward Penguin? I think you're talking about last week. Like I said, that was as I recall also, by the time I started running into trouble, it was also at the point where I'd been working on it quite a while and I was kind of running out of gas and getting a little impatient with Tahoma because truly I would have been able to do a better job with Krita, with the liquify tool. But as we'll see here, Blender really does blow them both away pretty bad, actually, when it comes to deformation. And the bottom line is deformation is a really big part of my normal workflow. Because I just feel like you see with his head here, you can just get a lot of acting mileage out of a single drawing if the tools will support it, if you can do it. Which in this case involved squash and stretch on his head. It ultimately involved flipping his head. And then again, I'll even say working in reverse here. The important thing about this shot is the very, very last thing you would want to do in the ink and paint stage is his eyes and mouth. Because that's the only stuff that actually involves additional drawing. So it makes way more sense to draw the body, ink and paint the body, ink and paint the head, and get everything working correct from a deformation and animation standpoint, and then just add the eyes and mouth afterwards, probably on a separate layer. Okay, so, well, how would you go about that? The interesting thing about this is, and the reason I even really wanted to do this live stream is because what we'll see here is how the deformation tools that you would use in the grease pencil are really, really quick and easy to get a shot working, okay? So let's say if I go back here to the grease pencil dope sheet, and I'm in object mode, so okay, so at the point where I flipped his head, I'll just point this out, something interesting with Blender. At the point where I flipped his head, okay, what I did was I jumped into edit mode and did it the same way we've done it for years in Blender, which is you make a selection, and what are we doing here? Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped back to object mode. Okay, so I'm going to hit Alt-A so nothing's selected. What I did with his head was when I got to the frame where I needed him to turn his head, I lassoed the head, and then I hit Control-P. Okay, if you hit Control-P, I'm sorry, my bad, it's just P, it's not Control-P. when you hit the P key, this is the way we've always done it in Blender with polygonal modeling, is this is how you take pieces of a model and separate them from each other. Now, the important thing to understand here is if you do separating in the grease pencil, I was kind of surprised. I figured it would separate them into a new layer. This is not how you separate points into a new layer. Now, obviously, when I did it, it was his head I had selected, not his, his unfinished hands. If you want to just move some points into a new layer, you hit the M key. And then you can move those points into a new layer, and you have the option of creating a new layer as well. Well, what I did was I hit the P key, and when you do that, what it actually does is it creates a completely separate grease pencil object. It turned out in this case that worked out fine. So what we have, it might be a little confusing at a glance, but what we have is we have Mel with his entire body all in a single grease pencil object, and then right on this frame, now his head appears in another grease pencil object, and as you can see, the keyframes continue from here in this grease pencil object. Okay, so this would be, let's call this head, because it's a standalone head, whereas we'll call this Mel, because it's actually not his body. It's everything, including his head, up until I separated it. And then Blender basically did the right thing. It cut the head completely out of this grease pencil object, and just pasted the strokes into a new grease pencil object, and I carried on from there, and just animated it from there. So, hope that makes sense. Again, if anybody's got questions, let me know. I mean, usually, I would say with Blender, I'm probably going to be able to answer them most of the time, since I've been using Blender for 20 years. But as far as the grease pencil goes, I've been doing most of the work in Tahoma and Krita for the last few months, so I am a little bit rusty. Let's put it that way. Okay, so now here's the important thing to understand about this. If we look at the deformations here, let's just look at what I did, okay? And so I drew this keyframe. Now, one thing you can do is go to the front view, so you just have a infinite canvas. It's one of the nice kind of selling points with Blender. So what I did was I drew the initial pose, and let me look here. I want to just make sure I'm not missing anything. Why? Okay, so one thing that's occurring to me here is, okay, this is interesting. Let me see here. Okay, so just so you guys understand what I'm looking at here, this is a little confusing to me. Here's why. Right now, if I turn his head off, his head doesn't disappear, and the reason is because the head doesn't actually become a keyframed grease pencil thing until I created the object on frame 24. So what's confusing me right now, just so you guys know, is I'm looking at the fact that I don't see a keyframe on frame 1. So what that tells me, well, it doesn't tell me much. It's a little weird. If I turn off the head layer of the, well, I'm turning off the sketch layer of the head grease pencil object, I'm not sure why I would still be seeing his head if there isn't a keyframe here. So that's a little strange. Now I do see a keyframe here in this layer, in the fills layer. Let me see. And that doesn't seem to do any good to turn it off. So that's one thing I'm going to say right now for me is a little confusing, because given that there isn't a keyframe here, the only thing I can figure is that this interpolated keyframe is just propagating backward to the beginning. Since that's the first keyframe, that's what it's going to show me up to that point. I'm not sure if that's what's going on, because you'll shade both separately and maybe the shadows will overlap. Correct. You're exactly right. The likely problem, the shadows won't overlap because the masking will still work. within each grease pencil object. I usually just have a shadows layer that I turn masking on for. So I don't think the shadows will be a problem. But I probably would not have used separate, the P key to separate. If I was doing it over, I probably would have just separated it into a different layer. However, there is actually an advantage to it, and the advantage is the same thing I kind of started with today. When I go to this frame, let's turn the head back on. When we go to this frame, I did a translation of the head, okay? Which means each of these frames are a separate grease pencil frame, which means each of these drawings, each of these frames here, would have to be inked and painted separately, because all the strokes are baked into the frames. Okay, so in that sense, having a separate grease pencil object is kind of the right idea when we get to ink and paint, because what you really want to do is draw his head one time and then just use translation or a lattice to do all the animation. Just so you don't have to ink and paint it multiple times. You don't really gain anything by doing the... Well, okay, let me qualify that. Where I was going to start today is that if you go into sculpt mode, okay, and so you do what I did here, where you just use the sculpting tools to squish things around, okay? It would be, and by the way, I need to be in the correct object. Okay, again, you guys, I'm a little rusty. Right now, I have a hold of the head object. If I go into object mode, okay, see, this is I'm kind of learning here. The head, even though I was grabbing hold of its layer, doesn't matter, because the currently selected grease pencil object was actually the body one. So therefore, I needed to go into object mode, grab the head, then go into sculpt or edit mode. Okay, so now as you can see, from a workflow standpoint, which is kind of what we're talking about tonight, it makes a lot of sense to just use the sculpting tools quick and dirty and just get your animation figured out, okay? If you wanted to extend this a little bit, you could, you could actually put a tween in like this, kind of stretch things like that if you wanted to, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put that in there, but, that's the kind of stuff you're doing when you're moving quick and you're using the sculpting tools to just dial in an animation. In this case, I'm pretty sure what I did was I simply selected all of the strokes in edit mode, A key, and then just moved them. Just hit the G key to move them around like that, and that's how this was animated. Okay, my whole point here is that's not how I'm going to animate it once we go to ink and paint. It works really well for getting the animation dialed in, but at the ink and paint stage, I want to pause a moment, really think about what I'm doing, and I'm suspecting the smarter strategy would be to draw or ink and paint his head one time and leave the eyes out, okay? Leave the eyes out, eyes, eyebrows, and mouth. Leave them all out. Ink and paint this one time, parent it to a lattice, and then use the lattice to do this animation, to squish it down and flip it, right? Okay, and that way, it's only got to be inked and painted once, and we just add the eyes and mouth over top of it afterwards. Okay, that's kind of what I'm thinking would be the appropriate approach. Now, in the body, we sort of saw the same kind of thing going on. If I select the body and come down here to the sketch layer, what I actually did was two things. One is, let's go into edit mode, would be to like grab the body like this, like grab the upper part of the body. And at this point, the head is still attached to the body, okay? So I'm going to actually save my work so that if I change something that I want to undo, I'll be able to pretty easily undo it. So what I did was I actually just kind of grabbed the upper part of the, darn it. Edit mode, Alt A. Okay, so what I did was hit Control, left mouse, and then I clicked down here, making sure that we're rotating around the 3D cursor, so that with proportional editing turned on, I could do this. I could kind of rotate his body and have it be squishy, you know. And if you turn down the proportional strength, then you get, as you can see, whatever level of control you want, right? It's all there. Okay, so in this case, we had a pose back here, and then I deformed it, and then I interpolated the in-between frames. The way you do that, if you did the same thing here, for example, what you would do is you would grab the 2 keyframes. You have to be in draw mode, and then you go to you just go to a spot somewhere between these 2 keyframes, and then if you hit Control E, Blender will interpolate the frames. Okay. In this case, that actually didn't work too badly. Let's go in a little closer and see how we could maybe make that work kind of nicely. If I go ahead and hit Control, let's see here. I want to hit Control, and then I suspect it doesn't want to let me individually select them without selecting the group. In other words, it's connecting them all. What I want to do is grab this one, and when I grab this one, it selects all to the left. So there's probably a hotkey that I don't know. If I hit Shift, Shift did it. Shift did the trick. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get rid of these 3 keyframes, like that, and then take these 2 and squish them closer together. You could have scaled them to accomplish the same thing. So now what should happen is Mel will sort of ease into his scowling, like he's thinking or confused or whatever. I don't know that that helps the animation, but it's, you know, that's how you do it. So any 2 drawings you can interpolate between that way. If I don't have this in there, I'm actually going to say let's take out one more and maybe just give it one little quick. Yeah, I would even say maybe, let me see. Yeah, that's ultimately where he lands, so I'm going to say let's get rid of that one. So it's just got one extra tween. Just gives it a little bit more bounce, right? I wouldn't say it's necessarily better, but it works. Okay, so I'm going to take a second look at Awkward Penguin's comments. It's the only downside to separating. Oh, yeah, you said that about the shadows. Should be interesting to see how the lattice flip and deform works for that. Well, we're going to find out here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, though, is I will say that there's always a dance with Blender, which is between your dope sheet and your grease pencil. This is a really important thing to understand. You're always going to have this dance going on. Okay? What I mean is, you're probably going to almost always find it useful to have 2 dope sheets open when you're working with the grease pencil. If you're using the other animation tools. Okay? Because the movement of his body is all being handled by these just animation keyframes. The entire grease pencil is being animated, in other words. Okay? Now this is interesting. This looks almost like a bug to me. But if I go to F9, okay, look here. Okay, I see what's going on. All right, so the grease pencil object is still called stroke. And the grease pencil, gosh, what do we call it? The data, the grease pencil data object. This is true with Blender polygonal models too. There's an object and then there's the object data. This has always been true in Blender. And so when I named it Mel and head, what I actually did was I named the grease pencil data block Mel. I didn't name the grease pencil object. Okay, now this is kind of useful, sort of yes and no. Because, there's a clear separation of data, let's say. We'll just call this head. But it can become a little confusing because I'm looking down here and it says Mel, but up here it said stroke. So that's a little confusing. So it's always a good idea to kind of keep your naming under control. Name things as you go so that they don't get confusing for you, especially if your scene gets bigger. I'm pretty good at keeping my scenes at a manageable size, so it probably shouldn't be much of an issue for me. But okay, so we're going to address the lattice thing per Awkward Penguin's point. Probably on the body first, I would say. This is kind of an interesting thing because what we could do is, since the head doesn't change until here, what we can do is, I would say, what I'm wrestling with right now is the choice between probably the right workflow versus demonstrating it. So I'm going to say the right workflow takes precedence. So what we really want to do is get ink and paint on his body so that we can then use the lattice to get things working the same way. Okay, what do I mean by that? It's a little confusing, but if we look at the Mel layer, we see that we have all these keyframes. Okay, so we don't want to do a bunch of double work. So what we really want to do in a perfect world is probably take the sketch layer and put it on the top of the stack so we can always see it no matter what, because that's going to be our guide. Okay, so now what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to do ink on the lines layer, and it's really going to be quite literally this single drawing. Now, importantly, the movement of his body over to here will still happen even if I do the single drawing of the ink and paint, because that's being controlled by the overall animation of the grease pencil object. I want to say to you guys, this is a bad idea. Hey, see ya, Maria. This is actually a bad idea. It would be better to have these animation keys linked to either the lattice or an empty, for the simple reason that you could get all the animation working perfectly, and then you could go into your outliner and actually disconnect them, so that when you're working with the nuance of his face or whatever, and you jump from key to key, you wouldn't have the character, jumping all over the screen, right? He would be staying in one place because the animation moving around the screen is actually being controlled by an empty. So I'm going to say, in this case, let's go here. Let's start off on the right foot here. And the way we'll start off on the right foot is to go ahead and add an empty into the scene. So I'm going to go into object mode and add an empty. Just a plain axis empty. So this is going to be the main, let's say, translation controller for Mel. Now, let's also say we're going to, are we definitely going to use a lattice? I would say so. But the lattice can be used for deformation, and we can make the lattice a child of the empty. So the translation will be controlled by the empty. So where does that lead us immediately? Number one, and by the way, all this is happening way slower than it would be happening if I was just like working without live streaming, because but I want to make sure it's clear what's going on. So step one is going to be, I'm going to add the lattice because we might as well put the lattice in and let it be parented to the empty and get the animation in place so that the lattice is controlling the grease pencil and the empty is controlling the lattice. That decouples everything and gives us total control, right? So that's what we're going to do. So let's add a lattice. All right, if we look at 3D space, this lattice does not need to be on the V dimension. It can be set to 1. Okay. And now what we'll do is, let's just say, for the sake of argument, I'm just going to say 16 in both dimensions. And we can always change that up until we have it animated. Once it's animated with shape keys, we can't change that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, whoops. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to hit the O key so proportional editing is turned off, and I'm going to scale this up. All right. And then I'm going to scale it back down because I actually want it to be... let's see here. I think what I really want is I want it to kind of run parallel to the body. And I'm going to say we are going to be, we're going to have a second lattice for his head. Now let me check something here. If I go scale on the z-axis, I'm looking at, is this actually scaling on its local z-axis? And it looks like it is, so that's good. That's what I wanted. Okay, so I'm going to scale it up, and then I'm going to go ahead and increase the resolution mainly because we're going to have pretty good control of his head as far as deformation goes. So, all right. So the grease pencil object will be, you can parent it to the lattice, but generally I think the preferred methodology is to go into your grease pencil modifiers. Well, no, strike that. I'm sorry. If you go into the grease pencil modifiers and add the lattice modifier, then Blender will create the lattice. Since I already created it manually, it makes more sense to say let's grab the grease pencil object and click Control P, and then we're going to do lattice deform. Okay? And then we take the lattice and Control P. So we select the lattice first, then we select the empty, hit Control P, and we're going to parent that to the object. Now, let me, okay, I've got automatic keyframing on, so I want to be a little careful here. I'm going to move this up and move this down to get this back to where it needs to be. Now we're going to have a problem. The problem is that Melchizedek wanders outside of the area of the lattice. This is what makes this workflow a little bit complicated. Okay? Because what we really want to do is we want to ink and paint the character and just use the pencil test as a guide for the rest of the animation. So I'm thinking out loud here. Given that that's true, the fact of the matter is it would probably be better to have the the sketch be a completely separate grease pencil object so it's not being manipulated by the lattice and the empty. Okay, that's totally doable. What we'll do is we'll go into the grease pencil object, we'll do the ink and paint, okay, and then we'll select this layer and do the same thing we did before. We'll separate it into a separate grease pencil object. I think that will work. Whether it'll carry forward all the animated keyframes, I'm not sure. So let's do it this way, just to be safe. Let's hit save. Okay. Control F9. I'm sorry, Shift F9 takes us to our outliner. And for now, let's make the empty and the lattice, which should be a child of it. Yep, there's the lattice. Let's make them invisible. And then as you can see, just so you're not getting confused, the Mel grease pencil object is now hidden. If you just looked at your outliner, you get confused because we're seeing the hierarchy now. It's an empty that owns a lattice that owns Mel. Okay, got it? So now what we're going to find out, and we can actually we can click here to go into the sketch layer. And does that put us in edit mode? Well, no, that puts us, we're still in object mode. So let's go to edit mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit, actually before I do this, I'm going to save again because I'm still at a point that I would want to be able to return to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit P, and I'm going to separate the active. That's perfect. That's what we wanted. We want to separate the active layer. That's exactly what we wanted. Awesome. Okay, So what that should have done, let me just look here. Let's go back to the, let's see if Blender did what we hoped Blender did. Okay. So now we have 3 grease pencil objects. And that has just the sketch layer. This has everything but the sketch layer. And this has just, so that's what we wanted. So now we have 3 grease pencil objects, and this is going to be our guide, right? This is what's parented to the lattice and the empty. So now all we got to do is use the lattice and the empty to just follow the pencil test and, you know, make it pretty much look the same. But we can't really do that until we first do the ink and paint, because right now, since we cut the sketch layer out, we can't see it, right? Duh. Okay, so Mikhail asks the big question: are you switching to Blender? Mikhail, I started with Blender. I've been using Blender since 1999, probably since before you were born. I don't know that. I don't know how old you are, Mikhail, but I've been using Blender for 22 years. Yeah, it is useful. So the P key, I love it because the P key allows you to really pick and choose. You can separate. It's quite useful because the way I did it before, what it really did for me was allowed me to separate the head from the body because they were all part of the same layer. So leave it to Blender to give you the right options to do what you wanted to do. Now, if we look at this, what we'll do is actually, let's add a utility layer here. See, I don't know. Let me check something. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Guys. I am going to try a little experiment here. Let's take this copy, okay, and we're going to change the name of it to Pencil Test. So this is our guide, okay, but look at this. Look at this. We can copy to selected. I'm looking at copy layer to object. So now I can copy the sketch layer back. Now I'm confused because it should be giving me the options of either Mel or head, not Mel 001. Mel 001. See, now this is where the difference between the naming of the object and the grease pencil data block can become confusing. So let's hit Shift F9. Let's go back to our outliner and see what the heck's going on. Okay, we've got our empty and our lattice, and it looks like both of them are parented to the empty. So we're going to take Mel 001, and I'm going to do the same thing I showed you guys the other day. I'm going to split this so that I can have my grease pencil stuff in view while at the same time being able to use the outliner. So this is pretty common. I mean, when you're animating, it's you know, as opposed to just drawing. You know, when you're actually working with animation data and stuff, it usually can get a little cluttered. And you can always hit Control Spacebar to just go to full screen if you just want to draw and clear your workspace up a little bit, right? Okay, so now I'm going to look at my layers. That's what I wanted. Okay, so the pencil test has just the sketch, and that's Mel 001. So we need to name this pencil test. I want both of them to have the same name. And then what I'm going to do is, see, this is parented to the lattice, which is parented to the empty, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go Alt-P and clear the parent. Okay? And now, as you can see, they're in a little bit different position. So that's actually kind of useful, because now what we'll do is we'll grab the, I wonder if we grab the empty, if the empty isn't showing, can we still grab it in the outliner? I don't know. Let's hit the G key and see what happens. We can't. Okay, so we need to turn the empty on. Grab it. And now what I want to do is just get these guys lined up. So now everything's, and by the way, okay. So now they're basically lined up. They're not exactly lined up, but they're pretty darn freaking close. Why did I do that? Well, the reason I did that is because now we have the pencil test. This is quite confusing. I might be having a dyslexia moment here. Because we've got our lattice and our empty. Let's turn the lattice on. And we've got the Mel grease pencil object. And then we've got the pencil test and the sketch layer. But okay, and so this is also called pencil test. So this is very confusing. And this has a sketch layer as well. So that is not good. It's not a big deal because all we have to do is just add more layers. But why are we seeing... Okay, so what I'm trying to get at here is we have a situation that appears to be more of a cloning situation than a duplicating situation. And that's always been a bit of a gotcha with Blender, is that you may be, you want to make sure you're duplicating the object's data block, not just the object itself, because you can have two different objects that are pointing to the same data, right? Pencil test is below head. And there's, okay, yeah, so they all have a sketch layer, which makes sense. There's the pencil test not parented to anything. And here, what's confusing is this one that's called Mel should still have 3 layers. Okay, so that's all right. We're going to check something. Let's create a layer and call it ink. Now this object is not going to have an ink layer. Well, yes it is. Actually, this is the one that will have the ink layer. So now what I'm looking at is, yes. Okay, so this is not good. What this means is when I duplicated it, I created 2 grease pencil objects that are actually pointing to the same exact grease pencil data. Again, this is something with Blender that's probably confusing to a lot of people. It's always been true with Blender ever since I've been using it, for 20 years. It harkens back to the old days when preserving memory was important, okay? The question is, what do you do about it, okay? If we go into object mode, let's pause a moment here and think about this. It seems to me that when I duplicated, and forgive me guys, but I have to puzzle this out kind of in real time here. When I duplicated the pencil test, yeah, if we change this to, this is supposed to be Mel. This is not supposed to be the pencil test. And here it's called pencil test. The object is called pencil test. Here the object is called Mel. But you can see that when I change the name, it changes in both of them. Okay. So now the question is, what we used to do with Blender would be, you would grab the pencil test object. This is probably what we have to do. I'll see if Blender has sort of changed its way of operating. What I would do is grab the pencil test object, okay, and I would hit the U key. See, let me see this. I'm on frame 1. I want to see what happens if I actually move it. Okay, so it isn't. So the animation data is independent because the animation data is being applied to the object, not the grease pencil data block. Okay, that makes sense. So the question is, what we used to do was hit the U key, and it might be like Shift U or something. So let's find out. Let's grab the empty. I'm grabbing stuff just to make sure that I'm in object mode and can grab what I want to grab. So I want to grab this object, and I'm guessing Shift U, nope. Control U, nope. Alt U, it used to be the U key. What we used to use the U key in Blender, as I recall, it's been a long time, but to do what was called make unique. And what it would do then is it would make all these, like all this grease pencil data here that's associated with the pencil test would be made unique from the grease pencil data that's attached to Mel. Right now we've got two objects that are actually both pointing to the same data. And that's definitely not going to work, because we want to delete the animation keys from one of them but not the other. So, object, apply, duplicate the object, duplicate linked. See, I did Shift D, I did not do Alt D. That is so weird. I'm going to delete this. Exit. Get it out of there. Okay, and what I wanted to do was grab this. Well, I don't want to be in edit mode. What I wanted to do, and again, sorry guys that it's a little clunky here, but what I really wanted to do was hit Shift D, and that did create another object. And unfortunately, if anyone knows, oh, there's like nobody here. The venerable Blender feature of being able to take two objects that are pointing to the same data and go ahead and make them unique so that there's a duplicate of the data. I have absolutely no idea where that is in Blender. You know, they've moved some things around. Okay, so now we have this duplicate object. So we'll just for fun we'll name it dupe. And now the question is, okay, actually maybe I did hit Alt D before, because look at this. Look at this. This is very interesting. This is called Mel.001. I don't think that was called Mel.001 before. I think it was just called Mel, which tells me it's a duplicate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt P to get rid of its parenting. And here's the dupe up here. And my suspicion is if I delete this ink layer, I'll bet you it's not going to delete in the other one. And it didn't. So that's good. This is what we wanted to get to. Okay. So now what we're going to do, so we've got this pencil test animation. That's the Mel.001 object. We'll call this pencil test. Okay. Down here, what we're going to do is take the sketch layer and we're going to get rid of all of these keyframes. Because all we want to do, we don't want him to be moving at all here. In fact, actually, the first thing we should do, let's grab the Mel object, is just get rid of these keys. As you can see, the pencil test object. Now, wait a second. Let me look at this. Yeah, Blender's definitely giving me fits here to a degree. In other words, if I grab this, okay, there it is. Dupe, I do not want this to have. Do I want this to have any? I guess I do, actually. I want to leave these animation keys here in the dupe because that's going to be our guide. So what I actually want to do is delete them here. Okay, these are getting gotten rid of. All right, so I'll hit the B key. So if any of this is like totally confusing, then say so, because it is confusing until you get used to it. Crazy thing about Blender this way is that once you do get used to it, you don't even think about it. But now what we have to do is duplicate the animation with the empty. Okay? Makes sense? So I'm going to hit the G key, and as you can see, we want to put that there, and then when Mel goes to here, we want to rotate. Okay, stop. We cannot be rotating on the 3D cursor. We have to be rotating on the median point of the empty. So that means we rotate forward like this, and then hit the G key, and basically, like I said, just get them lined up again. Okay? Okay, so it looks to me like this key should probably be here, and this one should be moved back one. Okay? And again, all we're trying to do is just duplicate the movement that we had before. Pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, when he gets to here, he's going to be leaning back. Hit the G key, line it up there, and then just see where it maybe falls apart here. Okay, so now if we take the pencil test and hide it, let's just see if he's moving about right. Okay, he's moving okay. Now what we're additionally going to do here is in our official Mel sketch now, let me think about this. This is where it might get a little tricky. Well, because yeah, we can do this. We can do this. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the animation, the additional drawings, the deformations, because they're here in the pencil test, and that'll be our guide. Right? It'll probably be easier, by the way, if we change the pencil test color in the final one to, okay, so this you're seeing, okay, so here you're seeing the same thing I described earlier. Even though these grease pencil objects are unique, we just proved that, they're actually pointing to the same palette. So if I change the color here, it also changes here. Okay. So this aspect of Blender can become extremely confusing for people because it's real different than most programs, frankly. So head, Mel, parents, it's all that. So duplicate. Let's turn on the duplicate. And the duplicate has the pencil test. We want to keep the deformations in the pencil test. We want to get rid of them here. So B for box select. Delete those keyframes. And now this is clearly going to be tougher than I thought. If I turn off the pencil test, he disappears. Oh, I see what's going on. I gotta hit undo a few times here. Okay. If we want to play it this way, then I have to have that. Yeah, I have to have one drawing of Mel. I deleted them all like an idiot. So B for box select. Well, it's a great example of what you're gonna run into. Okay. So now, as you can see, based on the animation of the empty, we're a little off here. So, on this keyframe, the empty should actually be something like that. Okay, now we don't want that interpolation. Not at all. Yep, so what we want to do is take this key here and duplicate it to probably about there. Okay, wait a minute. Again, dyslexia moment. I'm going to actually delete that. Okay, yeah, the problem is it's in the wrong position from the get-go here. So, you know, this might be tedious to watch, but I guarantee if you were doing it yourself, it would be more tedious. Like, I guarantee. Okay. Alright, so now, the question is, oh yeah, I see what happened. We had that little change there in his body weight. So, consider in the pencil test layer, can we turn the sketch down? Yes, okay, we can. And it looks like in Z space, which is actually Y space on my machine, the overlay of the two layers are going to be fighting each other because they're literally in the exact same place in, you know, let's call it Z space. Okay. Why did we do that? Well, yeah, this is actually quite problematic. Meaning it's brutally difficult to see what's going on in order to just get the work done, right? Because of the way the graphics are. I didn't know that was coming. You know, I didn't see that coming. Unfortunately. But so yeah, this is a little bit unfortunate because I was really hoping it would be easier to use the sketch as a guide for how I'm going to animate him with the lattice. But it's clearly really, really tricky to see. So there's a couple different ways we could go here. Probably the best approach would be to go into object mode, grab the lattice, and let's consider hit GY. I don't think that's going to help either because, well, maybe. We'll see. Yeah, that is unfortunate. I didn't really see that one coming. I thought these types of like OpenGL overlay issues were a thing of the past with Blender. So, yeah, it is what it is. Well, I guess the question does become how are you going to animate it, right? So if we turn off Mel, so we just look at what's happening, we can see that what we need is a squunch and then a stretch, and then he kind of lands, and then we're into the other head when it switches to the other head. So I'm thinking for my purposes, let's get this happening with the lattice, and then we'll probably for tonight, I'll probably stop after that actually. But so here's how we would do it. Let's turn the dupe off. We don't really need it on for the purpose of kind of getting this dialed in. Let's grab the lattice, and what we want to do is go to the to the lattice. What is this called? It's in the properties panel, but I guess it's just the lattice tab. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 shape keys. In all likelihood, that's all we're going to need, and I'll show you why here in half a second. But so what we're going to do is then go into edit mode, and then all we have to do is turn on the proportional editing tool, and I guess I just turned it off. Okay, and now we'll turn it down. Okay, let's just take a look at that and see if we like it. Yeah, it doesn't take much. It's not going to take much, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to say I think I'm going to just let that squunch a little bit more. Okay, and then also, actually, let's grab these vertices that are right. Obviously, you could turn up the resolution of the lattice as well. You could use a more a higher resolution lattice, but for me, I'm thinking this will work. So I'm hitting the G key, and then I'm hitting Shift. And what that does is it lets me move my mouse a lot, but only actually move this a little bit. How I wish some other tools that I use had that type of a feature, but they don't. Okay, so now what we'll see here is that if we take the range minimum and make it like -5, and we take the range maximum and make it like, well, we'll make it 5. What that does is it makes it so that the shape key can actually go beyond go beyond what I actually did in terms of distortion. Now, it turns out that the this part looks stupid as can be, obviously. Well, that's okay, so I blew it. That's okay. This is where actually you should have dual shape keys, so that if you get one little part of the deformation dialed in, you probably would be smarter to put the other deformation in a separate shape key. But not the end of the world. All we have to do is just grab a little region up here. And then, and by the way, the best way to do this is just grab it and move it around. If it feels like it would kind of work if it was animated, in other words, boink, you know, boo-doom, boo-doom, that type of thing, then you're probably in good shape. That's what I want. There, wait, that's better. Yes, I like that. So I'm going to make that. And then let's just see if it'll work. Not bad. Not bad. So you can see if I crank this up to 10. That actually pretty much gives me what I wanted. So now, here's the point. I can animate this any way I want to. Okay? We know that with the pencil test, what he does is he goes down a bit and then bounces up a bit and then it lands. I think that's right. Let me turn this off. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's turn this off so we can see what he does. So he scrunches, stretches, and lands. Okay, that's all I needed to know. Mr. Dyslexia needs to review it again. Scrunch, stretch, land. Scrunch, then stretch. So he's going to compress first, and then he's going to stretch. Okay? So now we can turn this off, because I can still see the animation keys. And what I'm going to do is right here, this is going to be just 0. Okay? And I'm going to hit the I key to insert a keyframe. So now he's going to squunch. Whoops. Squunch. Hit the I key to insert a keyframe. Stretch. land. I key. Okay, that's weird. I select this, I double click, and I type 0, and nothing happened. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, so now the difference between the pencil test and what we have here is that his expression doesn't change, but that doesn't matter. When we ink and paint it, we've got one single drawing that we're using for all of this, and then we just draw the eyes over top of it using the pencil test as a guide, right? So that's pretty good. Let's turn that off and that on. And I think, let me see this. Is this the pencil test? Yeah. So actually you can see that the animation I did, this deformation was done with the just grease pencil sculpting. So you can see that I actually exaggerated it quite a lot more than I just did. So let's turn Mel back on and let's turn the pencil test off. And we need to exaggerate this a little bit more, I think. So scrunch. We're doing the lattice. Scrunch. So he needs to scrunch even more. More like that. And then he needs to pop. We'll go ahead and go crazy with it and just see how it goes. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, see? Boom. Now I don't like, yes, I don't like that this happens over, okay, Dave, seriously, dude? That's what you're going to do? Okay, so I had grabbed all the keyframes. I didn't mean to. So here's what's actually supposed to happen. So now in this grease pencil object, all of the animation is being controlled by the empty and the lattice. And so now all I'm going to have to do is go ahead and do the ink and paint. And once he's colored in, all the animation will still happen automatically to the inked and painted layers. So for me, that is, let me see here. Can you just tint one? Again, the venerable technique in Blender is called make unique. And right now, I don't know where the make unique function has gone to. It's something that's been part of Blender for 20 years. So I don't know. But you can, perhaps here in the outliner, I'm not sure. You might want to look into it. But, you know, the idea is that it would be very, very controllable to determine what object data is being duplicated versus just being pointed to. If it's being pointed to, then if you change one, you change them both. So, okay, so this has been pretty deep and probably hard to watch. I understand it, but if you work with Blender and you're going to do the grease pencil and you're going to animate, you're going to bump into every single one of these problems. And they're not big problems. Once you sort of figure out how to do it, this is kind of what the point of the live stream tonight is. You begin to think about the workflow and kind of do things in the right order. So for me, that's it. I'm going to go ahead and sign off and call it a night. And you know, you guys join my Discord. There's a link in the description here that's a permanent invitation. You can join the Discord and show me what you guys are working on. I mean, it's all good. And of course, we are software agnostic here, whether it's Krita or Tahoma, OpenTunes or Blender. I don't really care. It's the right tool for the right job at the time. So with that, I will say good night. And as you guys know, there will be more later.